afternoon, everyone, or I guess good evening for some folks as well. Really happy to be here with the Battery. Haven't been into the space in quite a while, but I don't know how many people have been anywhere. My name is Ashara Ekundayo. I'm an independent curator and cultural worker. I live and work mostly on the unceded land of the Ramatash Ohlone Nation, also called Oakland, California. And it's a really beautiful place, but it is a place that is grappling, with identity and grappling with stories of land and ownership and identity that, really is fueled, by the cultural production of Indigenous and Black people. And we live and work inside of this community in the arts sector that is also grappling and coming to a reckoning as well as the global economy, the global conversation and the imagination of many people is really being tested. So it's my pleasure and my honor to hold a little bit of space this evening with my comrades and my friends, Wayee Chu and Lukaza Branfman-Verissimo. Wayee and I are new comrades, and Lukaza and I have known each other for some years and worked together here in Oakland and in the San Francisco Bay Area. So welcome to the space, and welcome to the conversation. I was brought on 6 months ago to be the curator for the Imagine Freedom Artworks for Abolition with Critical Resistance. This is an event, this conversation this evening is co-hosted by Critical Resistance, and so we are here to also represent the really amazing and beautiful and poignant work that they have been doing for more than 2 decades, and that they continue to do to really unpack these ideas of caging, policing, surveillance, and what we call, the prison industrial complex. And so this opportunity to reimagine freedom through art and art making with artists is really what we're interested in discussing this evening, and the various dynamics that we're grappling with throughout the United States. So thank you, Lukaza. Thank you, Wayee, for joining us. Why don't you introduce yourselves? And, because people got the invitation, they can read our bios. I think, thanks Colleen for reading a little bit of mine, but Lukaza, tell us a little bit about your work and your practice.
Yeah, hi, I'm Lukaza Branfman-Verissimo. Thanks for having us, Battery and Critical Resistance. I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and currently based after 10 years of being dearly beloved and tied to Oakland, California. I'm now based on Powhatan land in Richmond, Virginia. And my practice looks many different ways. I call myself an artist and an activist, a curator, an educator, and a storyteller, and choose to kind of center marginalized voices and stories and histories that don't often get told in those communities. I often place myself within them, and also choose to kind of do the work of investigating and honoring and centering and prioritizing lived experiences of Black, Indigenous, queer, trans people of color. So yeah, I'm honored to be here tonight. I feel like so much of my work as an artist is also my work as an activist. And I'm a longtime collaborator and fan and in community with Critical Resistance. And yeah, just feel honored to be able to do this reimagining work side by side and also within my art practice. I see those as one. I see those as always in conversation and always kind of investigating each other. And there's so much that I've learned from being a part of the abolition communities and activist worlds that has influenced my art practice. So for me, it's one, and I'm honored to be kind of investigating those worlds and the worlds we live in here tonight.
Indeed, thank you for that. Wayee?
Thank you, Lukaza, and thank you to the Battery for inviting me and to Critical Resistance for this partnership. I appreciate everyone's interest to join this evening, and I look forward to learning more from our panelists as well as the audience. So I am based here in San Francisco, also on the unceded territory of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. I am very passionate about contemporary art. My focus and emphasis as a collector is supporting living artists, mainly to those who are able to speak the questions of our time. Professionally, I am an impact investor, so I support entrepreneurs that are building solutions in education, and I draw a lot of parallels from my belief that entrepreneurs are a powerful agent of change as are artists. Art for me, or for many, is a critical vehicle of change and activism, and that's what really drives how I think about collecting and supporting artists. The purpose of how I collect is not to feel comfortable, and it's probably somewhat the opposite. While art should definitely celebrate, it provokes for me, and I do feel it plays an important role and constant reminder and call to action for me, for my family, and for the public. I am also a trustee at the SFMOMA. My work there focuses in the education and community engagement group. Like so many large art institutions, going through some real serious change and questioning right now. And I would only add, I have Lukaza's art behind me. I'm not physically in my office, though I wish I was, because her art does bring a call to action for me at work. But I hope we can spend some time learning about the artists in the auction, and look forward to having everyone's support around really getting to know these powerful artists and pieces to support critical resistance.
Yes, this is good. Thank you. Thank you both for your time and for your practice. One of the things that we have been talking about, in our few conversations, is that our practices are an extension of our political values. They are an extension of our respect for our ancestors, for the stories of the communities that we live in, for the neighborhoods, and honestly, for our comrades around us, but those who are also coming forward. And so, in the work that I have been doing as a social entrepreneur, as a curator as well across genre, is to really investigate what it means to excavate these stories, and to center them, to celebrate them, document them, and then to archive them. And so, the conversation around archiving is the archiving of what is happening now, and specifically what is happening in our world right now as it relates to the art sector and art making, and how we would have a conversation around an art auction, juxtaposed against an anti-racist, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist construct that critical resistance is actually built upon, and how that conversation touches into the mainstream art world and specifically institutions. So, we can start a couple of different places, but we only have an hour together. Let's talk a little bit about critical resistance. Lukaza, as you've mentioned, you've been a longtime collaborator in creative force, and have used your work in support of abolition work. And abolition has become such a hip term, I'm noting, that many different activists and artists use it. But Lukaza, if you could talk a little bit about how you came to be connect it to critical resistance and talk about the piece that's inside of the auction and what that means for you right now.
Yeah, so I'll just answer and begin talking, and then I'll screen share in a few minutes and can show the piece that I have donated to the auction. Where did it begin? Feels like family. I think CR has entered my orbit and my world in many different ways. I come from a long line of activists and organizers in my blood family and chosen family, and I think in part my mom, who is a big inspiration to me as an activist and artist and storyteller, kind of always having these conversations in our house, in our community, and in the streets and at the dining room table. And I think in part through her, and also in part through spending the last 10 years in Oakland, CR has been a neighbor of mine. Their beautiful new building is in my old neighborhood, and I feel, I mean, in so many ways, so many different movements work hand in hand with artists, but in my experience, CR has always kind of treasured and held artists' voice as having a place at the table and being at the root of doing this work. And so I've done a few storytelling projects around telling stories of incarcerated folks in California through printmaking and kind of spoken and written stories throughout the past few years, in some indirect relationship with specific campaigns that CR is doing, but also just in the broader kind of way of how artists are working to end incarceration and the carceral system. So they've called on me in different projects in different ways to make posters, to invite my voice and my community of artists to be at the table. So I see CR in that way, and also just in kind of the ways that they respect and really treasure and center artists as kind of offering and both dreaming of this world and also really being dedicated to doing this work. So the piece that I have in the auction, I guess I will screen share. We'll see how this goes. Okay. So this piece is called Our Stories of Resistance Need to Be in the News Too. And I made in conjunction with a solo show I had a year ago at Guerrero Gallery when it existed in San Francisco. And it is a two-sided piece. And a lot of my work uses text as the form of text and also kind of the written format of the story. And I was thinking a lot about, as I am still thinking about, how we can kind of dream and work towards a future where our stories of resistance are in the news and are kind of being told and being recognized, and just thinking about ways that stories are told or not told, as we are probably all spending lots of time on the news and in that whole world these days, and thinking about like dissemination of stories, both as like our stories of struggle, which often are the stories that we hear of Black and Brown people. It's like our stories of struggle, our stories of getting murdered. But also, how do we make sure that our stories of pleasure and sweetness and resistance also get told? And I think this auction does so much of that. It's like, it's artwork that is resisting, that shows our pleasure of making work in dialogue with this moment and dialogue with CR. And so this piece in so many ways felt like the perfect piece to donate, and I was so honored to. And it traditionally like hangs kind of like clothing line style. I'm really interested in how the art is also accessible and maybe doesn't necessarily need to get framed or doesn't need to hang on the wall in maybe the ways that we're used to viewing art. So it's two-sided, and we'll see. Whoever gets it, they can decide how they want it to be viewed.
Yeah, thank you. I was really excited when you brought it over to my home, you know, and then we sent it over to the space where all of the art is going to be. But it was really beautiful to like hold it and to like sit it one way, one direction, you know, and then the next day I turned it around. So just the meditation of bringing forth not only, as you said, the struggles of the movement, but also the sweetness and the joy and the pleasure that also comes, and that those are part of, and have to be, part of movement making, part of the struggle, means to be blissed out. And so, you know, not only to be focused on the trauma and the angst of it, and because it is righteous rage and righteous anger to be used, and it's also blatant joy. So thank you. Thank you for that. Well, you can,
well,
yeah,
to add,
chime in.
I brought my family to that exhibit, and I was commenting to Lukaza, the way you break text really forces also the viewer to really stop and be present and slow down. And my son and I are both dyslexic, actually, so it added more time. But I really benefited and really loved the time it took to spend with your piece, and I think that's part of the experience as well. So thank you for helping us all to slow down and be more present.
So you can see this piece at artsy.net, actually. I'm gonna screen share, and you all can check out. We're gonna take a little bit of a look, just a short look at the auction. So you get to see my crazy laptop too, but that's okay. It's all right. So this went up yesterday. We were really excited, had a fabulous cocktail hour to launch Critical Resistance's Imagine Freedom Artworks for Abolition. This is the benefit auction this year. Obviously, we have 78 artists who are supporting this effort. Let's see if I can figure out a way that I don't see you all. Okay, so we're gonna scroll just a little bit down, a few pages down. 78 artists, over 80 lots, and an amazing team of people who will help this come together. I mean, I hold the title curator, but honestly, the collective of us curated this exhibition. The curatorial team is pretty badass, honestly. So Lukaza, here's your piece. I see that there are 5 bids on it right now. So those of you who have not gone to Artsy before or aren't familiar with how this website works, you register to bid. You see the piece, you see some of the information about the artist and about the piece and the estimated value, and then the current bid. So we're excited about the idea of people supporting living artists. That is also very much part of my curatorial practice. My art practice is that of curation. And we have artists from all over the country, all over the United States. A lot of folks from the Bay Area, our friend Erica Demon, our elder brother, icon, Mr. Emory Douglas, who's the former Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party. Those of you who live here know that Oakland, California is the home of the Black Panther Party, and that many of our elders are very much alive and living and teaching and loving us And so Baba Emery is a longtime collaborator with Critical Resistance and immediately said yes, of course, when I invited him to sit on the host committee and to donate a piece of art. We have work by Theaster Gates as well, who is more than an art star. We have work by many artists. So I want to invite you all, and I know the link is in the chat. I want to invite everyone to take a look, and you can find out. So it's not only this auction, but it's also an exhibition, yes? And it's also a series of programs. So there's been a lot of conversation already happening, and we'll talk a little bit later about more programming that's coming up. But as you can see, there's a cross-genre, works on paper, works in neon, photography, sculpture, fiber, wood, all the things. So I'll stop sharing my screen for now. You know, when I was thinking about this conversation, the way we talked about a curator, a collector, and a practicing artist show up at a bar kind of conversation, and what kind of juiciness could we get into that? And when we started to look at the relationships that we have with different organizations, you know, where you talk about being a trustee at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. SFMOMA is in the midst of a reckoning, like many institutions. I was reading about the Guggenheim today. You know, they're about to open back up, but you know, there's been so much controversy, of course, around how many museums, you know, received PPP money. They have still laid off much of their staff. They are grappling with union relationships, and they're opening back up to the public on Friday. And I know one of the Artivists Radical Guerrilla collectives projected some images on the outside of the building yesterday. Open for exploitation is one. Open for racism is another. Guggenheim, we deserve better. So those are some of the calls that are going out to institutions. And, you know, then we have another dynamic like the Whitney Museum, who thought that they were going to be able to just acquire some highly reduced art and then create a show without the permission or the payment to the artist, primarily Black artists, primarily artists who are supporting the movement for Black lives, and, you know, did not give their permission. So the impact of organizing, the impact of standing up, we would be remiss to like not talk about that as well as part of this conversation. And, you know, so let's just tap it a little bit, you know, and see how you're feeling about it. Tell us about how that works. You know, you're a trustee, you're a board member. What does that mean for you personally?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And, you know, having worked over the last 20 years, both in large financial institutions, in the education sector, and my involvement in art, like I am not new to the systemic anything large and bureaucratic. And so there's a piece of me and how I think about it in having a platform at SFMOMA that change happens. It's not binary for me. It has to happen outside and it has to happen within, as it is in the education system and teacher unions and COVID right now, as in I work in venture capital and the pipeline of founders and access and opportunity of who can be an entrepreneur and who can decide. All these questions transcend also the art world. I know for a fact there's some serious questioning happening at the museum. I think first and foremost for me, I have led my efforts around supporting the public education and community engagement group, which has been probably hit the hardest in terms of their years in building grassroots relationships and having lost many of those in the last few months. You know, I think there's every aspect to where, you know, where do you put your energy in supporting? Is it the building out and redefining how a curatorial pipeline? Is it the curatorial programming? How do you define being a public service? These are all real questions. I think top of mind right now is safety of our employees. No employee should ever feel unsafe in any environment. And so there's a lot of internal prioritization in supporting existing talent and staff. But I do feel very strongly that, you know, I am here to learn and listen, and that we have to do the hard work both outside of the system as well inside. This is a big ship we're moving, a really big ship. And so I am here to learn and listen from our artists. You know, I think SFMOMA can be an incredible global platform and has an opportunity to redefine the future of contemporary art. And I also feel strongly this next generation of those that are protesting are going to be the next generation of museum visitors, of talent in curatorial, of philanthropy. And this is a generation of purpose. So if we don't fundamentally figure out a new economic model or model to support what the next generation is going to demand, we can't be a leading contemporary art institution. So I don't have clear answers. I know there are a lot of amends being made, but I am very committed to thinking about how we structurally think about the next generation of those that are going to lead these museums into the next decade or so.
Thank you for that. Lukaza, do you want to respond to that?
I guess I'm just thinking back to here we are as different, bringing different parts of this complicated community, invited by CR, and kind of thinking also about you know, ways that CR has taught myself to be kind of a stronger and broader and more inclusive thinker and activist and artist. And this is not a question to one person, but just something that I'm thinking about a lot right now is I think so much of this work around abolition is redefining, kind of breaking down the system that we're so used to, that we're so okay, we're playing the game, this is what we're in. And so much of this work that we're doing right now at this moment of fighting for Black liberation and uprising and during this global pandemic is shifting these systems. And so I wonder, maybe this is a question to you two and to all of us, but ways that we are shifting these kind of norms within our systems of being a collector, of being an artist, of being a curator, of being a cultural worker, kind of in line with the ways that CR does work, in line with this moment, that, you know, this system is broken and the system is not working. And, you know, I've done a lot of work in the past few months against ways that institutions have treated Black and Brown artists. And I think it gives me so much joy, because it's this is a flawed system and we are grabbing it and changing it. And so I wonder just ways that we are devoted to making these changes, and really kind of shifting, reprioritizing who should have the spotlight, who should be invested in our practices.
Yeah, these are good questions. I want to invite the audience to put some questions in the Q&A as well. We have questions, so we have questions of each other. I'm thinking about, you know, how we come, those of us who create space and building, literally put together brick and mortar spaces, launch companies. Wayee, you're someone who helps support the financing and the funding, you know, of people's brilliant ideas, as we say, innovative ideas, or venture capitalists, but also, you know, dream investor as well. as we were talking about and curating the curatorial team for Imagine Freedom Artworks for Abolition, the situation at the Whitney unfolded. And as we were putting together the catalog, so that, you know, folks could just, you know, get a better sense of critical resistance and the work that has always been fueled by art making and by artwork, we had to rethink, you know, what does it mean to create a system that really benefits the collectors and doesn't necessarily benefit the artist. And I want to read something. One of the curators on the team, on the curatorial team, sent some notes, and it was, you know, really kind of like rooted in a conversation that Dr. Ruthie Wilson-Gilmore, who is one of the co-founders of Critical Resistance, was talking about on KQED Arts last week. I'm just going to read, you know, what she wrote. Where life is precious, life is precious. This sums up abolition for me. Applied to the art world, it looks like less artists selling their work for astronomical prices and more artists making enough off their work to live. It looks like collectors not buying art as an investment vehicle and colluding with other collectors to manipulate the artist market. It looks like institutions paying full price for artworks and by consent selling those works with the artist's consent. It looks like artists being educated on the market so they can feel financially competent in all their engagements, and without this education, it bankrupts them. It looks like artists not being treated as whimsical children or irrational divas deserving of charity, kid gloves, but it sees artists as partners, as intellectual, financial, spiritual partners, and being fit, you know, to be part of this whole ecosystem together. It looks like valuing art primarily for its ability to reflect our aliveness back to us and backing that belief up with all of our actions and our resources. So my comrade, Mika committee, and it really is poignant. And I just wanted to share that with you all as we just struggle. You know, there are the levels of struggle that are happening right now. And if you have some thoughts or reflections on that or any other aspect of, again, how do we juxtapose and live with the contradictions of creating an art auction, you know, where the price is set at half of the value? Deal with what does it mean to be anti-capitalist and to need money. And so it means to like live with contradiction as abolitionists, as artists, as organizers. And so I just want to honor that, you know, and just place that on the table, that we're not, you know, shying away from that. It's really hard right now for artists. You have some thoughts? You're on mute, by the way.
I mean, I don't know, the complexity of contradiction, right, resonates through my life in all the work I do. I think there's so many entry points to change, though, and I think finding where that entry point of change for each of us is for those that want change, is important. And I tie it back to the mission of Critical Resistance as I think about the education perspective, and the school to prison pipeline is top of mind for my work in terms of, if you're not familiar, a lot of under-resourced schools become pipeline gateways by placing increased police reliance into schools versus investing in more counseling, advising, and teacher support. But I think more importantly, in terms of where the change starts, starts at the earliest ages of learners. I've always felt art is a great entry point for learning. I am one with a learning disability, as is my son. And if we can engage earlier, this cross-discipline of students being allowed to enter conversations, enter new narratives, enter math and science through the lens of visual art, I just see, having, so much power in that piece. And granted, right, there's an existing system and generation we need to shift and reform, as well as investing what we can do earlier to support. I also know, I think almost 50% of the prison population is diagnosed with ADHD. And what that looks like in a 3-year-old child is misbehavior, quote unquote, right? Impulsivity. And that pipeline continues with students with a lot of cognitive difference. So again, tying it back to thinking through the goals of critical resistance and where art can play a role is just something I wanted to come back to from the education perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. We had a conversation with KQED Arts last Wednesday with host committee member Deanna Van Buren, who is an architect, cultural worker, an activist, and her project and her company, Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, looks at space as well and reframes space, reuses space, and talks about, what it means to look at education systems, to look at the defunding of police, and to take that money and be very specific around centering cultural healing, progressive needs in communities. I want to go to this question that's in the Q&A box. Anonymous. Let's see here. Battery's going to answer this question live. I'm not sure what that means, so I'm just going to read it. The No New San Francisco Jail Coalition just won an 8-year struggle against the new jails. The notorious jail at 850 Bryant is now closed, for real. We are demanding that it be torn down and a life space built instead. What can you imagine in that space? What a beautiful question. And it's what's causing me to bring Designing Justice, Designing Spaces into this conversation as well. So there's the built environment, there's the natural environment, and there's the psychic environment, and how they all intertwine. You can't actually talk about one without talking about the other. You can't talk about racial justice without talking about climate justice, without talking about economic justice, without talking about abolishing caging in policing. So, Lukaza, what can you imagine in that space?
We were talking a little bit about this last night in the opening party, and just, raising our glass to the shutdown of that jail and the incredible, long, hard struggle that was to do that. And I think a lot about, I don't know, it's going to be amazing to dream up that. And dreaming is a part of this work, and we have to make time to dream. And also just thinking about like space in the Bay Area and like literal space, and also like the space that like wealth holds in that city. And what like reimagining, like when we reimagine what that space could hold, I feel like we must also reimagine how to reimagine land and space and who space is for in that city. And I think about, like all the thousands of unhoused folks in the Bay Area, and that, that work goes hand in hand with this work, and what it looks like to kind of imagine a world where people are housed and taken care of and prioritized. And so, yeah, I don't know, my mind is going back to like, yes, let's dream what that specific space can look like, but also let's dream of like what space should look like in this city. When we say that we're dedicated to doing the work, like what does that really look like? And I think there are like some spaces in the Bay that are doing that in incredible ways, a lot of artist-run spaces and collectives that I've been a part of, and SFMOMA Arts is an incredible example of an institution that really prioritizes the community and thinks about their large space and footprint that they hold, and you know, that we like investigate ways that like SFMOMA is gonna like prioritize this moment and also think about like their large footprint in San Francisco and what does it look like to, you know, be an empty museum right now when thousands of people in their own city need homes and need safe places to live in. So yeah, I invite us all to dream, and folks in the audience to dream as well, and feel free to put comments in the chat or answers to the question, and also think about like the ways that we ourselves, our personal selves, take up space, and how in this moment we're going to, I don't know, deeply investigate that space and what we hold, and how to do the work in relationship to the circles that we are in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I would only add, not only with the physical and visual space, and we actually had this conversation at the museum today of what it means in terms of community, the safe and brave space among and between our interactions. And, you know, is it a space that embraces uncomfort and multiple truths and deep listening, in understanding whose voice is missing? So I actually think who occupies that space and the agreements around engagement are critical to be thinking about as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I want to just shout out a couple of spaces that are actually in Los Angeles that have reframed space, and I want to note that there's a question in the box around how we can imagine a grassroots museum and what that might look like. The two spaces that come to mind are the Crenshaw Dairy Mart, which is co-founded by Patrice Cullors, Noe Olivas, and Alexandra Doniz, I can't remember their last name, but that's in Crenshaw district, obviously. And then there is Lauren Halsey, who co-founded Summer Everything. So, you know, these are artists, and this platform of artists as first responder, artists showing up first when there is an issue, a need, a crisis. It is the artist, and it is our artistic self that shows up to like forge solutions. But these are two spaces that have been reframed, and that serve primarily to support the community around it, the community that they have, you know, moved into. There is art exhibition, of course, but, you know, there's really engagement. And I was talking with Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco last week as well, about their very large museum and their theater space that is not being used, and the support that they are going to be providing to the Unified School District, the San Francisco Unified School District. And that, you know, let's take down some of the art, let's leave some of it up, and then let's create space for children to come in and have their classes there. So the people who are doing that work at that intersection of education, social justice, and space, literally, you know, institutions. So shouting out also Underground Museum in LA, the Women's Center for Creative Work, and the work that they're also doing. So, I mean, it is happening. Women are leading the way, honestly. And we also want to talk about, or not dismiss the idea that it is women of color, that it is Black women often that are leading the struggle, that are leading and speaking up first. And that if we were to listen to Black women, we wouldn't be in some of these situations that we're in right now. So that's real. I know we only have a few minutes left. I want to see and invite folks to put questions in the Q&A, or also, you know, for either of you to just think about and to speak to, what it means to steward space, and to be entrusted with that space, and what those spaces are, because it actually, there's the inner space and then there's the outer space, right? And what that means to like make the future present in our organizing work through artwork, and what that looks like for abolition right now. Thoughts, ideas, questions for me? I guess I'll talk a little bit, I can talk a little bit more about this beautiful exhibition and this series of programs and engagements that Critical Resistance has curated, has put together, and invite you all to go to the website, imaginefreedom.art, and look at the schedule, imaginefreedom.art. I know tomorrow, Mika Marple and Christine Wang will be in conversation. Christine Wang, again, another artist who has a long and beautiful relationship with CR, as well as Mika. And they will be talking that talk. But there's something special about when two friends come together to talk about their practice, but also to talk about their influence on each other, and to be able to be vulnerable with each other. And I think that's part of what is important and special about organizing work. On Friday, I will be joining the Wakanda Dream Lab in a conversation on AR, Afrofuturism, and abolition. So both of those conversations will be on the Critical Resistance Facebook account, Facebook Live. Even if you don't have a Facebook account, you can watch them. So that's just two of the conversations, and then we have things coming up next week as well. But check out not only the Artsy site, but check out the catalog. But go to imaginefreedom.art and follow Critical Resistance on Instagram, and support their work, because you don't have to buy art to support the work. You can actually support the work by making a donation. Let's see here. I think were you gonna say something, Lukaza? Or
I'm just thinking about the second question that's in the Q&A, and like, I know we talked a little bit about what some institutions are doing and some artist-run spaces that one might call a grassroots museum, and also this question: is it possible to depart from patriarchal white supremacist values while keeping a trustee structure, or is that inherently impossible? And I think we're all a part of this in so many different ways, and part of me is like, burn the museum down, like this is not a structure for us, and also it's like, this is so much a part of our world in ways that we like or don't like, or uncomfortable or comfortable with, that again, it's like, how do we invite the artist to be at the table with making this museum? Like, we have these museums that like probably are not going to go anywhere, at least for a while. But how do we really center artists? Like, museums run off of artists, but artists don't need museums. And how do we really invite the artist in? Like, if we're committed to buying and prioritizing artists of color, then why aren't they at the table? And why isn't there, a trustee, a board of trustee that represents who's being collected, or the people that are collected? Or why isn't it free to go to the museum? All these things that I think are barriers to, and that withhold the white supremacist structure. If we're being committed to that, then I think these institutions really have to listen and really have to do the work. I think that's at the core of so many spaces that I've been a part of making. It's that the people who the space is for are also a part of the making of it. And yeah, I'm just thinking about collective that I co-founded and is kind of in the works of being launched and being birthed into the East Bay, and that's Moments Collective and Cooperative, which was kind of started after the closing of a long-time bookstore in Oakland. And you know, we literally invited the queer and trans people of color in our community to be at the roots of the future of our collective and of our space, and centered that in the biggest way. And so we know it's possible, like this is possible, but are people really committed to doing this work and to being uncomfortable and tearing down these structures that have existed for so long, but that aren't sustainable?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. You know, the structure is actually white supremacy that has to be destroyed. So this decolonization of our minds requires that we be stripped of what we think are our pleasures and our power, and to really assess, like, what are you willing to give up? Because revolution actually requires that we all give up something. And for some of us, it's money. Some of us, it's space, it's property, it's land, it's debt. And, you know, what does that mean for you to really say, I want to live this anti-racist life, and I want to be an artist, a creator, a collector, an investor in revolution that is equitable, that is fair, that is just, that gets us free, you know? And if you're not ready to do that work, you need to get out the way, because those of us who are ready to do that work are doing it. And the creators and the artists who are doing that work aren't going to stop, didn't stop, you know? So being sheltered away in place, dealing with this global health crisis, there are many global health crises. We're dealing with this COVID-19 crisis right now, and this pandemic, as we all know, has laid bare for some who didn't know that this was how we've been living all along. And, you know, maybe in closing, we can just, some closing thoughts, and it can even be closing questions. You know, we didn't think we were going to answer everything tonight. But, you know, I will say that, yes, we have all shown, we're all impacted by it, but we're all guilty as well, you know. And so that's something to think about, you know, in terms of your place in society. If you're sitting in front of your computer for an hour, if you have the pleasure and the privilege of being able to do that, to sit and listen to people grapple, you know, and talk about art. And, you know, museums are my happy place. I grew up going to museums. But I chose to be an independent curator because of the structure of white supremacy and stolen legacy that is also part of this. And that doesn't mean that I don't want to curate in museums, you know, but it means that I'm really honest with myself about that. And I appreciate the both of you as well for your honesty and your willingness for us to just be in this as three brown women, you know, sitting in this space of beauty and rage. So closing thoughts.
No, you articulated much better, I think, for all of us looking to, again, I go back to where we think we can make the change, and being very honest with ourselves on the contradictions. You know, I'll speak for myself that I live, you know, in a capitalist society. Am I feeding an economic model among all nonprofit institutions, to be honest? And I'm in deep question of the sustainability going forward, right? And so I think, but my optimism lies, again, new models, new players, new ways to disrupt and think outside of the system are critical. And I think there has to be a bottoms up and top down effort going on in parallel. So I appreciate the complexity and the challenges, and we can't fear them, and we need to face them and find our own footing in the overall narrative where we think we can, you know, move the needle in the ways we can.
Lukaza?
Yeah, I think there's lots of things that I'll sit with after this, and I'm also glad that we were able to take a stab at it and just start these conversations of ways that we're all a part of this system, and also a part and dedicated to abolishing the system in different ways. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think there's so many contradictions that we all hold and that this auction holds even. And I think it's great that we're taking time to pull those layers apart and really look at them, and also yeah, figure out how we're going to do this work in our different worlds and sectors of being part of this complicated onion of this place. So yeah, thank you so much for starting this conversation. And yeah, I feel like it's a rare but important moment to be investigating this together, as bringing all these different worlds of the art world that we all bring.
Yeah. And I don't want us to forget about the funding world, you know, about philanthropy, about what that means and who is funded, whose work is funded, which artists are funded, and the impact of COVID-19 on the art world. Very much so, you know, and so the opportunity now that philanthropy foundations have to be vulnerable and to be bold and to be brave, you know, and to fund general operating, to fund innovation, to fund it at high levels for multiple years, you know, and that regardless of the work that you're doing, the organizing work that you're doing in the world, that there be a very clear, creative and artistic footprint, that all organizing work, there is no movement on the planet that has not been fueled by artists and art making. So if you're doing reproductive justice work, if you're doing education work, what is your line item for supporting living artists and arts institutions and organizers who work the culture? Because the culture is the cure. So with that, I want to thank you all for spending a little bit of time with us tonight. I want to invite you, of course, everyone, to join us to reimagine and to imagine freedom and to support critical resistance and their work, and to go to the artsy site and peruse the art and bid on it. Buy some art, you know? It's like the two things in our capitalist culture that acquire value: land and art. Yeah? So yeah, you know it's true. You know it's true.
Yep.
Yeah. I think we have some things in here to say. I want to just, yeah. Thank you to the Battery for hosting our conversation. Of course, thank you to Critical Resistance for continuing to be bold and beautiful and allowing a lot of creative license. And to thank the organizing committee, the curatorial committee, the staff, the members, the volunteers at Critical Resistance. And to thank the audience. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to say that part of being a fan of CR and donating to CR is also learning about other abolition projects and projects in my old state of California. And if you go to the CR website, there are lots of resources and other organizations in the state and nationally that are doing this important work. So it's part of a network, just as we are a network of artists and creatives. This work for abolition is part of all of our worlds and also part of this upcoming election. But yeah, go to the website and get educated and support.
Mm-hmm. Also, get a COVID test. Take the census, please. Take the census. Register to vote and vote. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wayee. Thank you, Lukaza.
Thank you.